The story of our faith is powerful because it helps shape the way that we see ourselves, others, and the world. When God's story resonates with our story, we find peace and wholeness in ways that simply can't be easily duplicated in other places. And when we share the story of our faith that resonates with our life with others, other people are blessed as their lives are impacted by our stories. And this year at Bethlehem, we've been inviting people to share their stories of resonance. And today we hear yet another story. I am so grateful that Eric Kuehl is willing to share how God's story has resonated with him in his life as he reflects on his experience of community over the years. This is Eric's story.
Hello, my name is Eric Kuehl. My wife and children and I have been members of Bethlehem for a number of years, and a few weeks ago, Pastor Chad asked me to share a story. So here I am today, and my story is titled Community. What does it mean to be part of a community? Who do you define as your community? Before we can answer what it is to be a community, let me read the definition. Community is defined as a group of people living in the same locality and under the same government. A group of people having common interest, similar, or identity. We will come back to this later, however. First, let me share with you my backstory to help you understand how it is that I have come to arrive here in St. Cloud, part of the community of Bethlehem Lutheran. I was born and raised in Trimont, Minnesota, in the southern part of the state. Trimont is a farming community of about 1,000 people in the late 70s and early 80s. And much like many small farming communities around the Midwest, was comprised mostly of German and Scandinavian settlers who seemed to be a little bit masochistic as they liked the same type of environment that they left in Northern Europe. The farm that I still call home today is in the shadow of the churches that Pastor Stephanie and her husband Anthony served prior to their arrival in St. Cloud. Many of my boyhood friends and family are still members of those communities yet today. I'm the oldest son of 3 boys in a family, from a very early age, I knew and understood that to be in this family and part of a farm, that we all had to pull our own weight. You see, growing up in the 80s on a farm was no easy task. Not that farming is easy anyway, but we were in the middle of what was often referred to as the farm crisis. Land prices inflated quickly, commodity prices were low, weather conditions had not been very favorable. Interest rates on what most small businesses take loans for operating on were extremely high. It was a tough time to try to eke out a living, much less try to raise a family. I remember vividly going to food distribution centers to pick up our allotment of staple food items for our family. I also vividly remember how important it was for the town of Trimont and its citizens to be part of a more intimate groups, namely that of churches. In those days, there were 5 churches in the town and another 5 that served rural Trimont. All of those German immigrants needed their own church, and the Scandinavian families needed theirs, the Catholics, and so on. We all seemed to revert to the old days and to the traditions that were brought from the old world to comfort us in the new. The Kuehl family was part of Emmanuel Lutheran Church, Galena Township, a Lutheran church Missouri Synod. I was baptized, confirmed. Suzanne and I were married in an LCMS church. The LCMS church is a very conservative organization, community. By history and even in today's standards, some conservative, often hard-line views on worship and even more on social issues. In those days, it was considered pretty liberal to actually visit another LCMS church just for a day of worship. To put things in perspective, I remember the day that the congregation I grew up in voted to give women the right to vote in the church. And so they were now members and not just the wife of a voting member. At family meals with my uncles and grandfather, this was hotly contested, but I did find it warming to hear that my family would indeed support the vote because it made the congregation more in tune with society. I tell you this to put in context some of the core beliefs and some of the values that I was raised into. My faith and teachings were very law and not a lot of gospel. My faith taught me that God was a jealous and judgmental God, and that there was no way for me, a sinner, to reach the kingdom of heaven. I was forever to be cursed with the idea of hell. I was also taught that the church judged the secular world, and its actions and tolerance of the changing world wasn't something taken lightly. People needed to convert to the old beliefs and ways, almost the Borg mentality from Star Trek, that resistance is futile, you must assimilate. For a few years as a young adult, I struggled, as I think many people do in a secular world, trying to find their way and trying to find their path through a faith in Jesus. My story is far from unique in small-town farming America. Agriculturalists face large amounts of stress from many angles, and to compound the issue, the lack of access to outlets to vent those issues and stress make this a powder keg in many homes across America. Suicide rates among farmers are higher than almost any other category of professionals outside of the military ranks. The high cost of goods, the lack of access to health care, the inherent nature of farmers to be proud and yet quiet people, and not to mention the inability to control many aspects, like weather and the price upon which they sell those goods that we as consumers want and need in our lives. You see, agriculturalists represent less than 2% of the U.S. population today, so the 98% looks from the outside in, and that doesn't understand what it takes. Farmers face criticism, sometimes warranted, from consumers. Think about what you hear in the news: climate change, animal abuse accusations, GMOs, water pollution, soil pollution, air quality around livestock farms, cow farts, subsidies, and so on. When you hear those things, you probably have a far different reaction than I do. I know that many of these headlines are opportunities for conversations for growth, as well as stories about successes in agriculture. Stories of improvements, stories of how less land is used to produce food today, less water, less inputs, and so on. Too often, however, when a farmer hears these criticisms piled on top of everything else, it can be too much to bear. And why do I share this with you, you may ask? You see, I make my living working in agriculture as a consultant, a salesperson, helping to improve on those efficiencies and telling the story of how agriculture can be a major part of the solution to improving our world and our quality of life. We want to pass this wonderful creation that God has given us to the next generation and many beyond. I also am in a unique position as I help those families that I spend time with in other ways through organizations like Farm Bureau, where I can utilize my talents to help share policies both in St. Paul and Washington, D.C., to improve the business climate and the climate for all parties involved. What does that have to do with community, you may ask? And how has this journey brought myself and my family here? Suzanne and I were married in 2001, and just over a year into our life together, we found ourselves moving to Tucson, Arizona. She landed a job with SlimFast, and I, with a teaching degree in agricultural education, took that to a local school. We were now 1,500 miles from home and in an environment where we didn't have a family or a community that we were a part of. We ended up trying a number of churches and eventually landed at Fountain of Life Lutheran Church and quickly found like-minded people, a warm, welcoming community that had activities to bring us into through music, fellowship, and prayer. We were able to be part of a mission expansion church that settled at the high school I taught at. From this, I found myself beginning to realize what it meant to be Christ-like, and that challenged some of the foundation that had been laid in my youth. I began to realize that I needed to change the lenses that I looked through that this small-town boy had had. We no longer lived in whitewashed Galena Township. Not that that was a bad thing, but I needed to grow. I needed to evolve and embrace that those things and those people who maybe looked different on the outside than me were more familiar and more like me than I thought. Those physical differences don't matter, you see. They don't change the character, and they shouldn't impact how I respond to them. Our journey then took us to California for approximately 6 years, and there we never did find a church family. However, we did find a community that we became very close to and friends for life. Friends that didn't have the faith background that I had, but still lived the golden rule. Here's where I really had to do some soul searching, and I was challenged to go specifically around social issues. This kid who had been taught so much about law and that God was vengeful had to learn how to be accepting. I had to learn how to be tolerant and to learn to love. I was put on this earth to emulate a loving God, to embrace what Jesus did by eating with the sinners, but that sinner was me. How could I love them? More specifically, my wife and myself. Carter, our oldest son, was born in California, and I realized that I had a lot to do on me so that the person I was now responsible for was raised in a way that reflected the love Jesus had for his people. We needed to be able to raise him with the skills and to adapt, and when necessary, to be able to change his own understanding of things, regardless of our convictions. Prior to his birth, I was in a dark place. I was selfish, I was immature, and I was unable to fully embrace how to change. Through much love, tolerance, and far too much patience from Suzanne, I finally began to get it. I needed to fix me before I would be able to be a good father and a husband. We have been blessed with 2 more sons after moving back to Minnesota. Rory and Soren, both of whom were baptized here at Bethlehem. They have friends here and are growing into their own persons. I couldn't be more proud of who they are and their unconditional love and their zest for life. Bethlehem has been a wonderful community for us, and for me, exponentially so. It has allowed me to continue my journey of tolerance, of love, and understanding of those with a different story. It also has pushed me outside of my comfort zone to sacrifice for a greater good in my service to the church through a number of communities. That learned love of my family, this body of people, and my ability to love like Jesus unconditionally, it's not easy and I struggle daily. But I know that I'm a better man, a better father, a better husband because of the reflection that I've been forced to do in service of this place. My journey, my evolution, if you will, is not unique. We all go through a metamorphosis of sorts through our life, and we get to learn from our mistakes. We get to readjust and continue forward. I, however, have been able to base mine in a love of the land, a love to be part of agriculture and that community, a community that wants nothing more than to provide for others and to know that they've helped others and other families live a better quality of life. I also realize we have a different origin story. We have taken different paths to arrive at this place in time, this church and this community. We have different aspirations, different goals, different experiences that all come together in at least one common thread, and that is a faith in Christ. Weekly, we hear Pastor Chad and Stephanie say,
Yes, you are welcome here because we are following the example of Jesus and welcoming everyone for who they are, just as they are.
Have you ever really given thought to that? To what that means? Right here, right now, in this very room, we are all in a different place. Different ages, different professionally, personally, socially, education, and so on. We all carry scars, wounds, ribbons, banners for all sorts of issues. But we are here because of our love of God and Christ and the community support that this house brings to each and every one of us for different reasons. Back to that farming community and suicide support. I had the opportunity a few years ago to participate in a suicide awareness and prevention program, a program sponsored through efforts of the state because of groups like Farm Bureau, asking for help to get resources in places to save lives. This is a subject that can be very scary and for years has been taboo, but in its basic form is very simple, something that we all have the ability to engage. Who is in your community? Can you say, do you need help? Can we sit down and talk? Can you really listen? I think we can, and really most of us, need someone to show that they care. Take time to sit and to listen, while trained help can be called in to step in and give the person the help that they truly need. I've used my training twice, and while maybe my situations weren't rock bottom for them, I know that I made a personal and positive difference. So if you have any interest, please consider the program that Pastor Stephanie has been talking about here at church. To close, I asked you at my opening, what does it mean to be part of a community? As a boy, for me, it was the church, as it was the center of everything that we did in our small farming town. We went there for everything. It was a neighborhood gathering place to play, to rejoice, to mourn, to commune, and to support each other while learning about this world together. To be a part of a community also means that we bring all of our strengths, our weaknesses, and our experiences together to be better as one. Share the joy, the pain, the wins and the losses, all as one body. I'm grateful for that conservative upbringing. To my parents for giving me their unconditional love. They moved the needle from their upbringing to mine, and I hope that I can do the same for my sons. I'm grateful for a wife that has been by my side when I truly didn't deserve her or recognize how amazing she is. I'm grateful for 3 healthy, vibrant, and enthusiastic sons that push me to be better every day. I'm thankful for a God that has shown me and given me the capacity to be better. A God that has walked beside me on this path with Him as a person, as well as a member of this community of Bethlehem Lutheran Church, St. Cloud, Minnesota. Thank you.